Hey guys, Dan here, back with another book review, and this time I'm going out on a limb here with this one. For Nonfiction November, I chose to read The Captured, a true story of abduction by Indians on the Texas frontier by Scott Zesch. I will have a picture of the cover of that book somewhere around here so you guys can see what that looks like, and I'll probably leave that up majority of the time that I'm talking about this book. Now, I say I'm going out on a limb here because with it being nonfiction, I know that everybody has different tastes in nonfiction. Some people don't even like to read nonfiction. To be quite honest with you, I don't like westerns, and this book takes place in the West, the Wild West, the great West frontier of Texas. But to be quite honest with you, I found this book to be very, very interesting, and I wanted to share it with you guys. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a written blog review or if I was going to talk about this in a video, but I kind of last minute decided, you know what, I'm just going to throw myself out there and I'm going to do a video review for this book because it was that good, guys. It was really that good. First off, I was surprised that this book was published in 2004, which I thought it would have been published a long, long time ago. But then again, the subject matter takes place in the late 1800s, and the author explains in the introduction how he came upon choosing to write this book. One of his relatives, who was named Adolph Korn, which is spelled Korn, I was surprised by that too, that their last name was Korn, was abducted by Indians, and he had discovered this relative of his because he knew he was related to him, but he found that he was in a different burial plot, separated away from the family, and he started asking questions, and he's like, why is he buried like so far away from the rest of the family? Like, why was he different? What was up with this guy? And relatives and people who had known of this guy had mentioned to him he was a white Indian. And white Indians were those who were abducted by Comanches or Apaches during the time of the frontier. And he really sets the mood for the book by explaining just how hard it was for life on the frontier, because it's not Little House on the Prairie. It's not easy going. It is hard times, and you got to remember that this is the wild. There is nothing out there. There are no other settlements. There may be a fort like miles away from where you choose to set up your homestead and all that, but there are no like general stores and stuff like that. And he sets the mood by explaining how hard the frontier life really was, and that children didn't really have much time to play and be children. They had to work and be a part of the farm and do stuff. And his uncle Adolph was one of these kids who he had to go work, and he was a sheep herder, and that's how he got abducted by Comanches. So I found that to be very interesting, and I learned a lot of different interesting things. Like, I didn't know there was this massive like migration of German immigrants and German American immigrants to the frontier, especially in Texas. I really did not know that. I think I kind of knew that German Americans and German immigrants did kind of head out west, but I didn't think that there were that many of them that went out west, and especially in Texas. But like I said, there was a lot of because his uncle Adolph didn't really, choose to tell people about what his abduction was like. There were a few people he mentions that just did not want to talk about it. And there was kind of like this Stockholm syndrome. Like, even though some of these kids would witness their family members being, like, brutally murdered at the time of their kidnapping, they would, after time, and some of these kids were only, like, with the Comanches for only like 6 to 9 months, and they would forget how to speak their native language, which was either German or English, and they would only know how to speak Comanche, and they were just in that whole mindset, and they didn't realize how little time had passed, and for them it seemed like a very long time. Now, he also mentions a couple of other narratives from other white Indians to help build the story for his relative, which kind of helps because there weren't that many of them, but you learn that the Comanches and Apaches, the reasoning for abducting, white and Mexican children was because they wanted to get like a ransom. Like some of these kids would be ransomed off. Other times, there were some very rare times where they may be like punished for murders that had happened against Native Americans. Sometimes they adopted them into their communities, which was what happened to a lot of these white Indians and how they came to be known as white Indians, because they got adopted into their communities and became a part of those communities. Now, this is not for the faint of heart. Now, I mentioned like how hard frontier life is, but when you hear the tales of abduction, they're pretty brutal because there is violence against women and children. I recall one scene where this young boy and girl were captured, and their either younger sibling or cousin was a toddler or a very young infant, and they would not stop crying, and the Comanches took that child and they dashed them against a tree until their, heads were mush. So yeah, very graphic, very brutal stuff going on, and they were not above raping and killing pregnant women, stuff like that. I mean, very brutal, but he does explain it from both sides. Like, this same kind of stuff was happening to the Comanches later on in history, because I think there was this whole relationship going on between the soldiers and the community, like these white settlers and the Native Americans who were habitating and migrating around this area, that it's their hunting grounds, and there was just so much conflict going on. But it was kind of, interesting to learn that years later, like near the later 1800s and early 1900s, they kind of like were more peaceful together and more friendly together. It's kind of weird, but it was an interesting thing to hear about, that they kind of, got over their grudges. Like I said, there was a lot of interesting facts about this. He goes into each individual, like, capture and, how they lived with the Comanches or Apaches at some time. There were the Smith brothers. There was another guy named Rudolph Fisher, and he talks about how he was with them the longest, I think, out of all the other abducted children. Really interesting, because he breaks it up into parts, like what their life was, how they got abducted, what their life was like when they were in the communities of the Native Americans, and then it's also, he goes into the after effects, like how they came to be coming back to their families and what life was like them after abduction, like post-abduction. Like, were they able to settle in their lives and live normal lives? And a lot of them found it hard to live normal lives, which I found interesting. Even the ones who were only abducted for like 9 months at the most were still like changed, like dramatically changed from the way they were before they had become abducted. So yeah, I found this to be a really interesting read. I'm big on history, like, even though I don't really like Westerns, I'm big on history, so I'm interested in history. And this is just one of those things that, like, when you're learning American history, they don't really, like I said, it's not Little House on the Prairie. They didn't really teach us about how brutal this stuff was and what had happened. So I found it very interesting. I love that the author gave both sides to that coin of that story. He didn't just take it from the white side, white perspective. He also gave the Native Americans' perspective, because he went and he interviewed Comanches and got their take on everything that was going on. So yeah, I found it to be very interesting. This guy went out with like this whole genealogical kind of family story and just blew it up into this even bigger story. So I'm good on him for doing this. Yeah, I found it to be very interesting. Yes, the language is kind of dated, but you got to remember it's from the 1800s, the late 1800s especially. So I know if you're one of those people, the PC people that's offended by, you know, Native Americans being referred to as Indians, you're going to have to overlook that, because this is a great historical like story that's being told. I really enjoyed this. I really think it's a good, you know, piece of history that people should learn about, especially if you are a Texan or somebody who lives out in the Midwest. I'm sure maybe you already know all this stuff, but for me, I'm in New York, and I found this very fascinating. I rated this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Of course, as always, I will have a link down below to purchase this on Amazon. U.S. residents, that's you. Also, for those of you outside the U.S., I have a book depository link where you can pick this book up. They offer free worldwide shipping. They offer the same great discounts as Amazon because they are a subsidy of Amazon. So yeah, I get a small percentage of every book sale from either one of those links. It helps me out as I'm not getting AdSense. I'm at 525 subscribers. I have all these views, but I just don't have the subs. So if you're looking for more book reviews, go ahead and hit that subscriber link. While you're there, hit that notification bell so you're well aware when I upload a new video. That's all I got for you guys. Stay tuned for my next video. And till then, take it easy.